Hi there, Finbar Dalton and Abraham Beluki here at Gigstar. We're super excited to be launching our new How To Hiring series, where every week we'll be tackling one major hiring challenge and provide three actionable tips on how to solve it. So, to get things started, this week we're going to talk about how to get more diverse candidates into leadership positions. So, Abraham, why do you think diversity is so important at the moment?
Well, there was a recent study conducted by McKinsey that found that companies with diverse executive leadership teams perform 36% better when it comes to profitability compared to those that don't have it. So clearly, we're seeing a correlation between company performance and having diverse leadership teams. And obviously, we've noticed it through our experience working with clients as well. It's become a huge priority for companies as a result.
Sure, no, that's super interesting. I think the other point that we were discussing, the other day around this is also sort of the proliferation of AI and sort of the societal and ethical implications that can have on society, and how it is important that the technology we're building is built with diversity by design. So
Yeah.
I think I saw one statistic the other day, which I was quite concerned about, which was that less than 2% of overall VC funding was going towards female founders. Now, if you think about that, that means that 98% of tech solutions are being designed by men. So they have
That's
those.
crazy. Yeah. Higher than expected.
It's quite difficult. It means that they're being built with certain perspectives in
Yeah.
mind. The same with other things, sort of like around sort of legal and government tech. I think that was quite an interesting point you were making the other day.
Yeah, the alignment problem. Really good book, by the way. You should definitely check it out. But yeah, and along those lines as well, we've seen that it has become a big priority for mainly those 2 to 3 reasons. So we carried out a couple of surveys to try and get to the root of the issue. So the first one we conducted was to find out what the biggest barrier to achieving diverse leadership is. And interestingly, we found that the second highest reason at 33% of those surveyed was cultural resistance. I mean, why do you think that might have been the case?
Yeah, this was one that I was really surprised with because, in terms of sort of the searches and recruitment that I've been working on most recently and sort of my relationship with hiring managers in that regard, I always feel like diversity is pretty front and center in terms of importance.
Yeah.
A lot of hiring managers that I speak with specifically even ask us to go and find more diverse candidates, or are very cognizant of trying to build out sort of a balanced team. So, for example, if they've recently just hired 2 to 3 men, often they're making a bit more of a commitment to then make sure that the next 2 hires are women. And I think that's why I was quite surprised about that. However, maybe this is different depending on what industry you work in. For example, if you're in a more sort of traditional company, then maybe they have more sort of entrenched resistance when it comes to diversity, or maybe the senior stakeholders haven't been educated on the specific benefits that come with building diverse teams, and as you pointed, obviously the financial implications that can have from a performance perspective. But yeah, I mean that's why I was quite surprised. The other reason, probably a bit less surprising, was the biggest reason, a bit less surprising, was unconscious bias, with 50% thinking that was the biggest barrier. I mean, what's your opinion there, Abraham?
Yeah, I think that was what a lot of us assumed would have been the main reason going into it. It's sometimes, as we've said, a lot of these hiring managers that we've spoken to, and again, it could just be our industry, but they mainly emphasize diversity being important. So when it comes to, well, why aren't the hires diverse? Then it could be an unconscious reason. So they're not thinking about it when they're making the hires. There could be an argument made that some people hire people in the mold of themselves and who are similar to themselves, and therefore what you get is, continuously over time, the teams just end up being the same. So that didn't surprise us too much, that was the main reason. So I suppose we know now that it is a huge issue, and we sort of identified 2 of those main barriers in terms of cultural resistance and unconscious bias. So we also surveyed, finding out, what do you think is the most effective strategy in getting more diverse candidates into leadership positions? And again, the data was quite interesting there as well. I mean, the number one reason seems to be transparent promotion criteria. So what do you think about that point?
Yeah, no, I think that ultimately is the best strategy. Like, ultimately people feel like they're working in sort of a meritocratic environment where they have sort of clear objectives, metrics, from which to base their performance off. It only really becomes a question of sort of numbers at that point in terms of like whether they're actually, due a promotion, in terms of sort of moving in upwards within the company. I think it's important to make sure that promotion criteria is outlined at the beginning when they start in their new role or at their new company, so that people have a clear idea of what they need to do to get to that next level. It's important to ensure that there's sort of weekly, if not monthly or quarterly, sort of reviews in place to make sure that people know what concrete steps that they need to take to get up to that next position. What they need to change to get there, like what their weaknesses are and what they need to work on. I think that's pretty clear. I think most people, what they want out of a role is just to work in an environment where they can do their best work and obviously get promoted for doing that. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, well, I agree. Again, it seems like those surveyed agreed that 56% that was for the number one reason. And I would just add on to that as well. I think when it comes to assessing performance and having sort of transparent promotion criteria, it can be a challenge for some positions. So for commercial positions, it might be relatively objective. As we were saying earlier, it could just be a figure, a revenue figure, a number of leads, etc. For particular positions like tech, product, it can be a bit more difficult to ascertain what the KPIs might be. So again, our recommendation would be to try and have it be at least as quantifiable as possible. So if it is a tech role, for example, and you're trying to come up with KPIs, have them maybe based around deadlines or something specific that you can actually assess an entire team against. Otherwise, you're not really using objective enough criteria, and that makes it more difficult to truly assess someone's performance. Going on to the second main reason. So the second most effective strategy we found from the people we surveyed is diverse interview panels. So at 31% of people thought that would be the best solution for getting more diverse candidates into leadership positions. What are your thoughts on diverse interview panels?
Yeah, I mean, I think diverse interview panels falls into sort of one of the previous point around the barriers that often people think, unconscious bias is the biggest reason that, for a lack of diverse candidates into leadership positions. So again, it's, making sure that the environment and is set for people to feel like the interview process is being sort of, run as efficiently and as objectively as possible. I also think, for new applicants coming into your organization, it's a positive sign that obviously you are taking diversity seriously, that there is a career path for diverse candidates within the organization, especially if they're getting interviewed by more senior people on that panel who are from a sort of diverse background. That's great to see.
Yeah.
I think if there's not somebody in your team that currently is from a sort of underrepresented group, then you can always bring in people from other departments or functions within the business to help out with that. I also think on this point, diverse interview panels is important, but one other thing that I think is important is around sort of interview training. So I think a lot of hiring managers, unfortunately, haven't been, properly trained in how to conduct interviews, how to sort of run an objective recruitment process. So I think there is, that can be really beneficial for teams if they are, I guess, upskilled in that regard as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's a good point you raise as well in getting other members of the team involved. I mean, sometimes interview processes are just around the one team that the candidate is applying to. But we do see, and we have been seeing recently, a lot of startups and scale-ups adopting these cultural interviews, or interviews where they interview, where the candidate can speak to people from different departments in the organization to get an understanding of the wider culture of the organization, not just the role in particular. So we've already sort of covered a few points in terms of ways that we can tackle the issue, especially regarding the survey that we conducted. But we have three main points that we wanted to talk about as well. So we've already covered, in terms of our three actionable points, the first one being having transparent promotion criteria, the second one being diverse interview panels. There is a third one. So what would be our third action point?
Yeah, I think the third one was more around sort of developing future leaders. So obviously, it might be more skewed towards organizations that are slightly, medium or larger size and have the capacity to be able to, invest in new initiatives around this. But I think it was sort of ensuring, maybe implementing effective sort of mentorship programs within the business, so to create those future leaders of tomorrow. So to help those people that maybe are in sort of senior individual contributor roles or middle management roles to then take a step up and move into sort of a more executive position.
Yeah.
We see a lot of different sort of styles and mentorship programs throughout the industry. Some are more effective than others. But I mean, in your opinion, Abraham, what do you think makes, an effective mentorship program in that regard?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there needs to be some structure to it, because oftentimes mentorship programs are stated, by the company that this is something that we're trying to do and it's an initiative. But where is the structure there? How are you actually approaching it? I think at the bare minimum, there should be some sort of quarterly target when it comes to that mentorship program. So, for example, whether it's even a quarterly meeting where, let's say, a more junior person at the company speaks to a more senior person who's from a diverse background, and they help them in terms of assessing their performance, in terms of recommending training for them. I mean, I think it just comes down to sticking to some sort of structure and making sure that relationship is actually there, because oftentimes, someone might receive a mentor, or they might receive I've been in companies where they've had like buddy schemes, for example, but they're never stuck to, and it seems like you get introduced to someone and you never go through with it. So I think that's the key thing. I think having some kind of structure and having targets when it comes to it is probably the only way that organizations are really going to stick to it.
Sure. No, I agree with that. I think, even if you don't have sort of a big internal initiative around mentorship, there are a lot of other third-party initiatives out there based around sort of diversity and different diversity groups within that. So even if you don't want to develop your own sort of full-time, internal mentorship program, it can be quite an effective way to partner with other third-party groups in that regard.
Yeah.
To run that as well in conjunction with other companies. Because I do think, whilst it's important to have, from a candidate perspective, you can obviously have internal mentors within the organization, but you can obviously meet up people who work in other companies who have got to where you want to be. So being able to connect with people, from other organizations can also be hugely beneficial as well.
Exactly. I mean, and most of the customers we work with tend to be startups or scale-ups, so they just don't have the size sometimes to really have a mentorship program like that, or the diverse leadership anywhere in the first place. So you would probably only see those for large organizations. So in those instances, 100%, I think that's a really good idea. If you're as a startup founder or a senior member of the startup team and you really want to get more diverse hires, partnering with a third-party organization is probably the best way of doing it, and getting your name out there as well.
Sure. No, good stuff. Well, yeah, hopefully, we've provided a bit more information on sort of why diversity is such a hot topic at the moment, why it's so important for, startups and scale-ups to get right. And hopefully our free actionable tips, including, diverse interview panels, building transparent promotion criteria, and partnering or building your own mentorship program can help you implement that within your own organizations. Obviously, if there are any other hiring challenges that you're struggling with at the moment, please drop them in the comments and we can tackle them in future videos. If not, we look forward to doing our next one next week. Thanks for your time.